Today's economic climate looks very different, and I'm sure we've all had to adapt to the new normal, and that includes the way we view our banking details as well. Joining me today in the studio and on the Zoom call as well, we have Pamela Makubela, who is an attorney and a conveyancer from STBB. We also have Mary J. Fourie, who is a lifestyle financial planner, a lifestyle coach, as well as a facilitator, and Tracy Jensen, who's a senior investment analyst at Nedgroup Investments. Welcome, ladies. Now, we are a tech-savvy nation, so please feel free to engage with us via the live chat. Ask us any questions that you may have, and we'll see to them at the end of the chat. Now, if at any point you disconnect, please feel free to refresh the link and we'll connect with you to be part of the conversation. Now, ladies, I am very excited to delve into this conversation today because I think many people save for different reasons. Now, the truth is, finances and savings can be very intimidating, especially for someone who maybe isn't used to, saving. And we had a chat about this a little bit earlier about how, saving looks different for everyone. Mary, I'm going to direct this question to you. Why is financial planning vital for women?
I think it's vital for everyone, but speaking to our audience of women, it's important to know why you want money and to tell your money what you want it to do. Because if you don't tell it what you want it to do, someone else is going to.
Now, what role does educating ourselves about savings and investment play? Because ultimately, we all want to make well-informed decisions, especially when it comes to our money. Agreed.
I think educating ourselves and empowering ourselves is really important, especially because financial planning alone is an event that you don't do once off. It is an ongoing process. But it's the habits and behaviors you have in between on a day-to-day basis that are going to help you get to wherever you want to go. So learning, empowering, educating yourself about day-to-day money mastery is going to definitely benefit you in the long term.
What does that day-to-day mastery look like?
That's a very good question. Getting curious about why you making the decisions and choices that you're making. So what are my triggers to spend money? What are the reasons I spend money on the various things that I do in my life, in my world? Am I making conscious choices about what I spend money on? Do I track my spending and look at my debit orders that go off each month? Do I plan in advance and think about how I want to spend before the month starts and before I whip out my card? Because it's just so easy to spend these days. With everything being digital, we tap with our phones now. We're not even swiping a card and putting a signature down anymore.
Tracy, when it comes to saving and investing, one would say that, you're setting money aside for your future. Is this, are these concepts similar? What is the difference between saving and investing?
Oh, it's a great question. So I think a lot of people, even I use it interchangeably, but I think of saving more as I'm saving for something in my near future, like I'm saving for a car deposit in the next year, or I'm saving for my child's birthday in a few months, quite short-term things. It's money you're going to spend quite soon. Whereas investing is about the longer term. So you're not just putting that money in sort of interest earning that's not going to grow significantly, but you're actually taking it and buying shares like, for example, Woolworths or ShopRite or Pick and Pay. You're buying businesses and things that are really going to grow. So if you think about saving for university, for a young child, that's a really long term. If you're talking about saving for retirement, that's a really long term. So anything that becomes a longer term, you'd really want to think about investing as opposed to just setting money aside that's not really going to grow for you.
Now, when is the best time for women or people to get into, to start thinking about investing and to get into investing?
So I feel like this is a cliche answer, but now we're actually having this conversation earlier. And so many of the time when I talk to people, especially because I work a lot in the retirement space and they're close to retirement and they go, oh, I wish I knew this like sooner, or I wish I had started sooner. And even for myself, when I started my first job, I thought, I don't know how I thought I was going to do this, but I'm going to have a Ferrari by the time I'm 30. And I was planning this amazing shoe line that I was going to start, and all these, I won't say plans, they were more like cool ideas, but nothing concrete. And so I thought I'll start later. And then I started working on all these tools and models. And every day I'd look at it and go, flip, the later I start, do you know how difficult it is to catch up? So I'll just give you, I don't want to bombard people with stats, but if you start at 20 versus age 40 and you start saving and you want to get to the same place by the time you retire, you have to save 3 times the amount to get to the same place. Now, we struggle to save already. How are we going to save 3 times the amount? So, yeah, really start as soon as possible.
And there's so many options that, one could invest in. Where should we be investing? Is it in property? Is it in, what kind of unit trusts? What should we be investing in?
So I think it comes back, which is really nice that it fits in with the question you asked about saving and investing. So if you're saving, meaning you're going to need that money in the next 2 years, like the examples I gave, you really can use something like a money market fund, or your bank will have a fixed deposit, notice deposit. You don't need a lot of growth. It's for a relatively short period and it's super easy to do. So there's sort of no excuses to finding and going through a whole analysis. When you talk about investing, it's because it's such a long-term thing, you want to give it a little bit more thought. And there, what I find is quite easy is to use something like a unit trust, because there's a professional manager who's put it all together for you and pre-packaged it. So it sort of makes your life easier. And yes, there are different types. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but just at a high level, the longer the term, so as you start getting to a goal that's only 7 years plus out, which is quite a long time, you want a unit trust that invests mostly in shares in companies. When you start coming closer to the 2-year mark, you don't want a lot of investments in shares in companies, because I'm sure we've all seen on the news it goes up and it goes down. So over short periods, it's quite volatile. But as you become a longer term investor, or as I said, if you're saving for your child's varsity, which is still like 10, 15 years away, and you have that time, then that's more the kind of investment you're looking for.
One would say, for example, I earn very little money. So saving and investing is going to be a little bit of a challenge for me. How can they save?
So I actually had this question quite early on in my career at one of the first events I went to, and I was quite sure. That's a tough question, because the lady who asked it, she wasn't actually attending the event. She was one of the ladies helping clean up, and she only earned a few $1,000. And I thought, how do you tell somebody like this to even set aside 200 or 300 rand, when that could be food for their family? And so really when I thought about it, and it sounds cliche, but it's really about investing in yourself initially, as opposed to what we talk about here as like a formal savings vehicle. So, I'll give you an example. One of the organizations I volunteered is called Paradigm Shift. They train people on how to set up a business. It's over like a period of 6 months. It's practical. They even give a business loan with a business plan. And so there's things out there you can do that don't cost money. Or there's even things you can do is find companies or placements where maybe you can volunteer for 2 or 3 hours a day if you have a bit of extra time, not get a salary, but build up those skills. So even if you don't have the financial means, try look for something where you can actually develop your skills so that you can then earn a higher income, so that you can then, get to those places you want to do. And as Mary J said, not just for the sake, but so that you can, invest in your kids or your family, allow yourself to develop and grow and have the space to do that.
I want to bring Pamela into this conversation, and so that we can touch on investing from a property perspective. Last year, Fin24 released an article late August about how there was a steady increase of women who were buying property, which is incredible, especially now that we're celebrating Women's Month as well. So this article touched on the fact that more women in South Africa were first-time buyers than men in South Africa. And Pamela, I just wanted to ask you, for first-time buyers, how much should one be saving, prior to buying property?
So Angela, hi ladies. I would start by just looking at it from a perspective, and it's become trite that people think that you need to have some deposit. It was in the past a common practice that you must have saved up 10% of that of the purchase price of whatever property you're interested in. However, I would tell clients, if you're starting to look at maybe wanting to buy a property, start small. As a first-time buyer, we usually want to aim at ownership. We want to aim at living in the property, and you're already thinking of your dream home. But the whole point, and touching based on what Tracy said about starting small, is that as a first-time buyer, if you start just saving $50 today, in a few months' time, in a few years' time, you'll have enough to just put forward a deposit. As a first-time buyer, when you approach a seller and you have, for instance, 20,000, that already shows how much dedication you have to buying that property, and it comes to your advantage even when you're applying for a bond and so forth, so you can use that. So I would say whatever amount you can save, start today, and then when you approach the bank as a first-time buyer, they will then guide you into how much they can give. I mean, you can even end up getting 100% bond, and those type of fees or whatever amount you have saved can actually cover the extra costs that come into buying your first-time property.
Now, some of the costs that we don't hear about when, I'm sure there are additional costs when you are buying property. What should we be aware of when it comes to those additional costs, and how should people incorporate that into their savings?
That's such a great question, Andela. And I see it a lot in practice with my clients, where when they started the journey of being excited, going after that property that I'm interested in, and the process has been so smooth. You get a bond, you apply for a bond from a bank, and they've offered you this, and they tell you 100% bond. Immediately, when a consumer hears 100% bond, they understand that, oh no, I've got everything covered. And the scary part now, and which doesn't have to be every property investor's story, is that you can save up, and then extra costs that come up to that is, number one is your transfer costs. That is regulated by the Legal Practice Council, and it's regulated so all the conveyancing firms work according to that tariff. So according to a scale that you usually would, if you bought a property for $1 million, it will indicate to you how much those transfer costs are. The bank will further appoint bond attorneys. Those attorneys that are going to attend to the registration of that bond need to be paid, and those costs have to come from you. What I do suggest is that before you even, engage into this journey, preparation makes everything perfect, if you ask me. And what I suggest to most clients is that engage the banks, utilize them like Nedbank. They have a home loan facility department that can give so much advice just by you starting the process. They can indicate to you, you're going to be, you're going to apply for a bond. This is how much you're eligible for. This is how much you're going to pay on your transfer costs. This is how much, So those facilities and that information you can gather from platforms like Nedbank, and they are incredible at assisting that. They have calculators on their systems, on their websites, where you can just calculate and have an idea of what the extra costs that you may incur will be.
Now, I want to bring back the financial planning and savings side of things, Mary J. Now, as women, we juggle multiple roles, whether it be at home, at the workspace, business women as well, on a daily basis. What are your financial top tips for women who want to make sound, saving decisions?
Ask yourself why you're making any decision, and question what's driving that decision. Slow down your decision making. Sometimes we can be so quick to rush to making a decision because we just want to get it over with, that we don't stop and question, why are we making this decision? And my last point would be, question, how is this going to help me get closer towards whatever my financial or life goals are? Does this decision move me closer, or does it feel like it would give me immediate gratification, but actually hold me back from a longer term goal in that as an unintended consequence?
Now, there are single women who don't have spouses. Does their savings look different, compared to women who do have spouses?
It's will for a variety of reasons. I think number one is, as individuals, we have different goals. So I'm just from one single woman to another single woman, what you're saving and investing for will be different. There's also the benefit that comes when you are in a relationship of sharing costs, sharing expenses, building and growing assets together as well. But often in relationships, and different relationships operate differently, we've got to make sure that we're communicating and that we are planning together, if we're thinking about getting into a relationship with someone. And as a single woman, to realize that there might be a lot more responsibility on ourselves to take care of things that no one else will take care of for us.
Thank you for pointing that out. Tracy, I want to come back to you and speak a little bit more about investments and savings. For someone who is saying, there is no money left at the end of the month, and they've tried their best to do so, what are some of the practical tips that you can, give them in terms of starting to invest or to save?
Yeah, so I think that's true for a lot of us. If you ask, I'm sure you've all heard that saying which says, how much is enough? Just a little bit more. Because as soon as we earn more, we tend to spend more, which I think comes to your thing about what decision are you making? Is it short term? Is it long term? But really, sorry, just remind me of the question because I'm going down a tangent.
What are some of the practical tips that you can advise?
So it's again about that culture and that habit, and that's why starting now, as we discussed earlier, was so important. You've got to save first and spend second. And I think most of us spend and then we save what's left, but there's never anything left. And I actually a few years ago met with somebody who was earning over 100,000 a month, and he told me he couldn't save, and I was like trying to understand this. So I sat down with him and I looked at it, and he had this massive house with this massive bond and this awesome car with this big repayment. And so I think some of the practical things is, your car and your house is a lifestyle. It's not an investment, So if you want to, as to your point, if you want to spend that much on your lifestyle and then you can't save, that's fine. But I think we've got to be objective about this is a lifestyle, not an investment. If you're living in the house, it's not an investment. So firstly, consider that, look at that. Then save first. So that might take a longer process. You're not going to just sell your house tomorrow and make a rash decision. You're downscaling. So that's a longer process. But set up a debit order. I had a colleague, he was quite eccentric. He was in sales, but he said the power of the debit order. But it's true because it's easier for us to make a decision now about something that's going to happen later. So if I commit to it now, then it comes off. If I say, I'll see how it goes in the month, often we don't do it. So I'd really encourage people who are wanting to save, start today, start off the call, set a goal, set something by the end of the week. Say, by the end of the week, I want to have, even if it's saved 100 Rand, just put something in place. Then be patient with yourself. You're not going to suddenly be saving 5,000 a month from saving nothing. So set that target and decide, okay, in month 2, I want to up that 100 Rand to 300 Rand. And in month 3, but commit to it now, write it down somewhere, set up the debit order, and just reassess your lifestyle, whether that's what you want or not.
Now, a little bit earlier, you also mentioned, the power of saving right now. For women, because we juggle and we do so much, is there a specific milestone that a woman should be, aiming to save towards? For example, if a person is planning on having a child, or, furthering their studies or paying for their children's studies, or retirement even. I mean, what could that look like in terms of saving?
So I think it's an interesting question. It's something we've actually been looking at quite a lot, also with behavioral scientists. And what they've said, and I'll come back to you now, Mary J, because I'm sure you have something to add on that. is that people are generally quite vague about like what they're saving for. We in the industry often think, okay, you have this bucket and you have this bucket and this is for retirement and this is for this. But I think to be a little bit more flexible around that, because life isn't always so planned out. Things don't always, well, as we know with COVID,
Yes.
things don't always come out in boxes. So I see it more broadly as I need some kind of short-term savings in case something happens that's unexpected, or for like, maybe it's your child's 18th birthday, something that's, then you need sort of like a more mid-term bucket, which might be longer-term goals like a university education, something further away. Maybe it's your 40th coming up in like 5 or 6 years, and you want a massive like event that you want to host. And then your very long-term like retirement. So I prefer to keep it as general buckets, like your very short-term savings, your medium-term, which, as I said, sort of like your 5 to 10 year, and then your very long-term goals, as opposed to being quite rigid about that. But I'm sure Mary J maybe has thoughts on it.
I think it comes back to that intention and purpose for each thing, and giving yourself permission to use those savings as well when you have an event that ticks the box of what that bucket is for. And from what I've seen with what's available out there at various bank accounts, it's easy and quick to create different buckets to save into. But we first got to decide why. What is it for, and how do all the different pieces fit together?
Pam, I want to rope you into this conversation as well. With perfecting the art of saving, many people are, as Tracy mentioned, are either saving for children's universities or saving for a big wedding or children's education or even property. What are some of your top tips for someone who is looking to save for their future home?
So I think, one of the things, property is fun and adventurous, but it's complex sometimes and it can easily intimidate people. But that's why we're having this conversation, so that people don't have to be intimidated, and people can know that just like, you take on each goal bit by bit. And when you think of dream home, you're already thinking of this big mansion, beautiful place, whatever. But we're young women. We're in a space where we're still navigating and we're still learning things. So I always say to clients, usually start small, Ondela. It's important. The truth of the matter is, if you want to build a property portfolio, which will be a form of an asset for you long term, then you must be willing to start small. And the tip that I'd give is that, for instance, you work in a certain environment, you live probably in a close by environment, which is quite ideal, and you want to live in that specific area, but your affordability may not sometimes speak to that. And it's important that you assess that. So what I usually tell clients is that if you're starting to build for that bigger dream, start with the small one. And the small one is where you would buy probably a small apartment somewhere, put in a tenant, let that tenant pay the bond, repayments per month. Let that tenant pay for the levies or whichever area you're buying into, the rates and taxes. Well, obviously, depending on how your deal is structured. But my point being that you would have at least be sitting with a small asset, but you've started. And that asset can then afford you the opportunity to basically go on to a second one, because you might get a bond that gives you a facility. For a first-time buyer, you might get 100% bond, and basically you are just putting a tenant under that roof, and you've already officially started your property portfolio. So the tips that I would give is to say, start small, and don't start, you're not going to start at 5 million. You can start at 300,000, and that already is you starting to be realistic. So I think people need to, like Mary said, intention and being realistic as well is very much important. We all wish we could afford 5 million, but we can start at 300,000.
Thank you, Pam. I think it's very important to be realistic about your situation as well as an individual, especially when it comes to finances. Now, I want to pose a question to both of you, Mary and Tracy. Now, this question is also from the audience as well. How do we encourage women to speak openly about savings and investments?
Do you want to go?
Oh, I love this. How do we break the taboo of not talking about money, which culturally, socially, there's just so much stigma, right, around the connections, the meaning we ascribe to money. My view is money's just a tool. It's a system. It's a form of exchange. It's a form of showing value. And yet we make it so deeply personal and about us that we then get too scared to talk about it because it might mean that I'm not good at money or I'm not good at whatever connected to money. And I think it's time to disconnect that. Money has no meaning until we give it meaning. And there's so much power in learning from each other, in sharing our experiences and our stories, giving each other tips, and questioning what we believe about money too. Getting curious about what we pick up from society and how we constantly comparing ourselves to each other too. You know, and we see it with social media. Now that we have this amazing connected world that can do beautiful things like connect us today to so many people, but we're seeing everyone's highlights reels in social media, and we're comparing their highlights to our whole story. And I think it's about coming back to ourselves and again, the reality of what is my situation, what are my goals, and how are the steps I'm taking today moving me closer towards that, regardless of what everybody else is doing.
I think, I've had a situation in my close friendship circle, and it was really, really hard for this person. But at some point they said, I can't actually afford to do all these outings and things that you guys are doing. And it was hectic because you don't always have those conversations. And so, you know, when she said that, it's like, oh, well, it's fine. We can do other stuff. We can go to the beach. We don't have to go and do these things. But it was really hard for her to say that. And I think sometimes we forget to check in as well. Like we just assume, oh, let's do this, let's do that. And it's fun, and it is fun. And, you know, but sometimes I think also just to check in with people, like, are you on board? Maybe give options. And once one person, obviously I'm talking about in a safe space, a close group of friends, once one person opens up, and if you the person who is willing to open up that conversation, I think it creates the space for other people to then also say, or when they're going through things, to go, like, guys, at the moment things are really tight. I'd love to see you, but do you want to come over for coffee instead of going to a 3-course dinner with wine tasting, you know?
And I think I love what you said, Mary, about how we're conditioned to fear conversations such as these, which is why I'm so grateful for Net Group Investments that we've been able to come together and to unpack all the things that money, you know, come with. So where do you think, or how do you think we break that element of fear? Because sometimes it stems back to, you know, our upbringing. You're told to not talk about money, and it's very private at home, depending on, you know, your home background. How do we unlearn that fear?
It's tough. I think it's a choice on the one hand to decide that I firstly want to acknowledge that I have that fear. So it starts with awareness that there is something that is holding me back from having these conversations, or being honest with my girlfriends that, hey, I love you and I want to see you, but this is a bit much, versus compromising my financial situation to make it happen. It's the first step is awareness, and then being honest with ourselves. And then from there, just taking that first step of courage, find that one safe space or person that you can speak to, and just start the conversation. Find. I mean, we've got the community connected to this event on LinkedIn. You could start asking questions there. There are other people who are willing and wanting to have that conversation. So seek out those people that also want to learn and grow, and bridge and break the taboo.
I like that. I also have another question here. It says, I'll pose it to both of you ladies. It is a finance savings one. What advice can I give to my 20-year-old? She keeps telling me she puts money in her savings account, in her savings pocket, because she can access it anytime, and that makes me nervous.
I'll start from my own personal experience. And this was, again, coming back to my first job. I spent a lot of money in the first year or two. But But I actually think that was okay because I worked really hard to get there and I sacrificed a lot of time and earning an income while studying. And so for me, I allowed myself, like, this is really great. I've worked really hard for this. I'm going to enjoy it. And then after that year or two, I said, okay, now you need to get serious and you need to save. So I think it comes back to Mary J's point about what is her daughter's goals and how much should a parent get involved with that. I mean, I understand the point of you want to teach your children to be responsible, but how much of it do you also allow them to choose what they spend? I don't have the answer. I don't know.
Well, my thinking was also, as a parent, how you approach the conversation, I think is really important, right? Because you either going to scare your kid away from having the conversation if you're going to be directive and tell them what to do, and you're going to judge them and question their own decisions, and the fact that they're learning and experimenting. So if it is a first job and I am saving to spend on whatever it is, I'm still figuring it out. But I love the idea of approaching the conversation from, well, what is it for? Get curious. Rather have a conversation of like, oh, you're saving. That's so exciting. Tell me what it's for. What are you thinking about? What are you planning? And then you could nudge a little bit like, oh, and what comes next? Or what about the future? Or imagine if you started saving now for this thing, how much could you have at that point? And turn it into like a cool little explorative adventure together versus no, that's not how you do it. Because I know if my mother had told me what to do when I was 20, in fact, if my mother told me what to do now, I would probably not listen. But if she got curious, I might be excited to show her and to go, this is what I'm thinking, and involve her.
So it's vital to have those conversations, especially with the young ones.
Yeah.
Pamela, I want to shoot over to you. I have a question here that says, when it comes to property, is it true that when you deposit a lump sum into a bank account, this may reduce your monthly payments?
Okay, so I mean that's a great question, but it's obviously it could be wider. But I think that I can look at it from two angles. So the person might be asking that if you've already got a bond, I gather. You can help me think, ladies, is if you already got a bond and you need to repay, is that what they're asking? Possibly.
Yes. Let's take it from that angle.
Let's take it from that angle. So, in practice, obviously, I have days where I see clients and they come in and sign the transfer and the bond documents. And that stack of documents that we need to sign, I need to make sure that they walk out feeling confident in what they sign and what they understand. So one of the documents that we'll go through will specifically state that this is the bond, the repayment amount that you will pay on a monthly basis. It can always work to your advantage to put in extra whenever you can. So you paying in a lump sum or even adding, and hence I said to you, the question could be looked at from two angles. The one angle will be putting in a lump sum whenever you do get that money. And the other angle could be you adding on, if let's say your bond repayment is 1,000 Rand, and you add on every month 100 Rand, that can reduce your bond, your bond period by almost 5-6 years, depending on how much you put in. And obviously then will save you how much then you would have paid over the period of 200 and let's say 240. The average bond is about 20 years long. But if you paid less, if you paid more on a monthly basis, then your bond is bound to finish at an earlier stage than what it would have. And automatically the interest would have not accrued, which means that you would have saved money. So it's definitely a positive. I suggest anyone that can do that, that's in an agreement with the bank to repay their bond. If you can put in that extra 100 Rand, if you can put in a lump sum in there, do it. It can only have positive effects on your finances.
I'm glad you touched on interest rates, and this is a question for all of you ladies, in fact. When it comes to interest rates and property, this person asks, why are interest rates so low, especially with banking institutions?
Can I just
go for it, Pam?
So, well, I mean, for us, I know for us ladies who probably know that it looks like a very straightforward. We link to prime right now, and that's why the property market is booming. You may call it even a buyer's market. Where prime is right now is at 7, and that means that the interest rates are going to be low. And that's what we're seeing in the market in terms of property. So as a result, and further to that, Rondella, in terms of interest, I would further say to people that they look low, so you need to be realistic that they'll go up at some point, because right now, because of the climate that's why they're so low as well. So a lot of economic activity influences that. I'm not sure if the ladies want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I think both on what you're earning as well as what you pay, it goes both ways. So I'm not sure if the question which angle the person was coming from, but effectively the government has some control in setting interest rates, if we put it at a high level. And with Corona and all the impacts on lockdown and businesses not being able to operate, they want interest rates to be low. People can borrow more easily. They can invest, hopefully, in businesses. And the idea is, as Pamela was saying, is to get the economy to try help it get going. They're not worried about inflation because people are not really spending excessively. So their main aim is to bring interest rates low so that people spend, so that people buy, like the activity Pamela was talking about. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, and it's also about profitability for banks in terms of how much interest they can give. Generally, my understanding is the longer you save or invest for, the higher the interest that you can get. Banks are more willing to give you a high interest rate if you say you can have my cash for 30 days, 60 days, 5 years. It's important to shop around and compare. And I think also in terms of paying interest back, to realize that interest rates will go up in the future too. So what I can afford today, how far am I stretching myself to be able to afford that? If there is a rise in interest rates in a year, 2 years, 3 years, how do I expect my income to increase to keep up with that as well?
Thank you for that, ladies.
I think I want to really emphasize for those ladies that are watching, and it's not ladies, it could be ladies and gents that are watching and joining us, specifically with property as well. We find that obviously because it's a buyer's market, that interest rate today looks low and you are at a very comfortable space and you can afford. But long term, you need to think in the future. You need to think what's going to happen when the interest rate goes up. How's my affordability going to be? Am I still going to be able to maintain my life? Am I still going to be able to service my bond? So those things are very vital, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our viewers walk away with this understanding, that understanding your finances is understanding it today, and then making sure that it reflects onto the future of how that looks like.
Agreed. I've never heard someone say to the bank, I won't take the bond I qualify for, I'll take less. And for me, that's a question to ask. If I qualify for a bond of $1 million, what about buying for 800,000 to give myself that breathing space for the future? Because I don't think many of us, we try and take the maximum versus just a little bit less, and then it's more comfortable in the long term.
I think that's really topical because, I haven't actually told you guys this. We're waiting for our house to transfer. So I was married recently. And that's exactly...
Congratulations.
Thank you. And that's exactly what we did. I actually said, if interest rates double, can we still afford this bond? And that's how we went about choosing. And then on top of that, which is a really practical tip, I said, okay, for this current amount, plus allowing a margin if interest rates move, let's save that amount every month. Let's put it aside and let's see how it goes. Like, let's see what unexpected things happen. Let's see how tight we have to live. And it really helped us determine what we can actually afford, and not just, and I know because I've had this conversation with other family and friends, not stretching it to the max and then something happens with interest rates, which can well happen, especially as we start getting economic activity going, and then you're in trouble.
While we're still on bonds, we have a question here from the live chat that says, I have a bond and I pay extra every month. My understanding was that the extra amount goes towards reducing my outstanding amount. I have access to this extra amount to use as I please. My question is, what impact does spending this extra money have on my outstanding balance?
Okay, so what people need to understand about the repayments of a bond before we go anywhere. The first few years you're paying the interest. And that's why but it's supposed to be going down. You're paying the interest off. But I gather that what our viewers asking us is that if she's got there's a facility, there's an access where you have a facility where you can get money out of your bond. I gather that's what you guys are getting to.
I think so.
Yeah.
Is our viewer taking money out of their facility and using it outside? Because that is a prop or a form of facility that the bank gives you when you have a bond, where you can go back into that pocket and take money out of it and, well, do whatever as you please, maybe buy another property or even, invest into something else. So I think that's where, but I'm unclear about. But if that the viewer's asking that, what impact does it have? Automatically, what it means that you kind of not moving forward 10 steps. You're moving forward 10 steps forward, but then you're taking like 20 back. Because the reality is that the money that you're taking out of that facility, automatically you're going to owe more, and there's going to be interest that's going to accrue on that money. So you're basically just standing in a whirlwind. That's how it's moving, just like this. So you take money out of it, 200,000, but you're busy paying like maybe 50,000 back. So you can understand how that set off doesn't really put you in a positive position, unless, of course, you're taking out that money to put into a better investment so that later you can put money back into that facility and pay back that bond.
Would you like to?
So note to self, I would say if it's not really something pivotal that they need to use it for, then rather leave that facility for something really, really, let it be your kitty for really important things. Or further investments.
Thank you for that. I have another question just to add on. It's also a bond-related question. It says, with the interest rate being so low at the moment, is it advisable to have a fixed interest rate, which is generally higher on a bond? I'll open that up to any.
Do the ladies want to speak?
It is a tricky one, because that comes back to the education and empowerment side of, do you believe that interest rates are going to go up in the short term? Therefore, fixing it at a fixed rate is going to benefit you over the longer period. And that's quite a judgment call to make. I think even those in financial services would find it difficult to make that call. Even economists get it wrong.
Often.
Often. So,
I think maybe, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it could be linked to affordability. If you know, which I'm not advising you should do in the first place, if you know it's going to be quite tight, but fixing it means you've got a buffer for 2 years or 3 years, then maybe it's something to consider. But if you're doing it because you're playing yourself up against interest rates, as you were saying, it's really hard to get that call right.
Feels like gambling a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Andela, I see it in practice. I always like chatting to people according to what I see on the ground. And one of my clients that came and said, I want it fixed because, I want to know this how much I'm going to pay. I just want to know. I don't care if it's high. I don't care if it's low now. I don't care how hard you can sell me about the idea of having it being a variable interest rate. But what they said is that I'd rather know that I'm going to pay 10,000 for, and if it obviously goes up, it'll go up by a nominal number. But people want it fixed because they just want to basically know that this is where I stand. And these are obviously, like you said, like Mary said, it's a gamble, but people that want it variable, then it's a matter of just saying, look, I want to know how much I'm going to pay long term, and that's it. And you just got to trust your instinct in terms of that.
Thank you, ladies.
Providing certainty.
Yeah.
Now,
that's my take.
I want to bring back the conversation to a question that's linked here in the chat box. And it says, when you access funds from the bond that increase your balance, when you access funds from the bond that increases your balance and that has a negative impact on the term of the loan, rather use the funds to invest. True or false statement?
So you mean instead of paying extra into your bond, you want to invest the money? Or you want to take money out you've paid and invest it?
That's what I'm hearing. Take it out of the bond and
Yeah,
invest
that's what I'm
it
hearing.
elsewhere. That's a game of interest rates and playing interest rates off each other. And that's a question of what's the interest rate you're paying on your bond, and can you get a higher interest rate? Can that money, if you invest it and you're earning it elsewhere, earn more? But there's quite a bit of maths that one would need to sit and look at to project that accurately and make a call on that.
At the moment, quite likely an investment is expected, and I'm using that word expected, to earn a higher return than interest rates. But as I said, investing is a long-term game. So that expectation could look like this before it comes back up. So I would say, if you're willing to wait out that term and you can afford to take the risk, because you're going to have to pay that higher bond repayment and it might not pan out as you expected, then it's something you can consider, but it's not a guaranteed, cool, I'll take this out, interest rates are low, so I'm not going to have to pay much, and I'm going to put it here and this is going to grow phenomenally. There's no guarantee that that's going to happen. So if you're willing to take that risk at the moment, yes, it's expected that that's how it will play out, but things do not always pan out as expected.
Speaking of
I
things...
know.
Sorry, Fami, continue.
No, I was just saying that I know some clients will say that, look, they've paid off the bond, or maybe the bond is like a very low amount outstanding, and they'll take that to finance a new property. So I think it's very important to obviously go sit down with the banker. It's not one of those one stroke type of fits all. It has to be something where you have to go in, and like platforms like Nedbank and banks like this, you have a division that you can approach that can advise you about what are the risks that sit there. You know, like Mary said, it's not something you can just advise just like that. There's so much more that goes into that. But if you want to take the risk, it's something you can consider, because it depends where you're taking it as well and what are the returns on it.
I really want to touch on the saving strategies, because we have a question here about that precise thing. Somebody's asking, what is the best saving strategy when it's almost too late in your life?
We were talking about this earlier as well. It's a hard one, because normally with investing, the returns do a lot of the heavy lifting and you don't have to contribute that much. When you start late, you have to do the heavy lifting, meaning you have to save, you have to get serious about saving and cut out basically anything. I mean, I'm talking about now, like if you're saving for retirement, I presume that's sort of the context, because you're going to stop earning an income and this is going to be it. There's no silver bullet. Like, you just, once it's that late, you're not going to earn that much returns and you have to save as much as you can. And one of the other things I saw a lot of people doing, and I think even with COVID, but this was pre-COVID, is people have side hustles. So if you can't retire, you're not going to have enough, is to start thinking about what skills you can build or what side hustle you can maybe create when you do retire. South Africans are very entrepreneurial. I saw quite a lot of that is, in addition to saving, how can I prepare myself for that transition and have an alternative source or sources of income?
And it's something to look forward to and something to do at retirement as well, something to get up for in the morning. I think beyond just planning the money side, which I think we get stuck on. We get stuck on like retirement and the money and the saving, and one day when I reach this magical line in the sand, But what then? What are you getting up for each morning? What's going to bring you purpose and meaning and joy in your life? And creating a side hustle and something that fuels you, that doesn't have to take up a 40-hour work week, could just be a part-time thing. It could be a few days a week or a few hours, brings meaning and purpose as well. And it eases the financial stress around providing in that space too.
This is also another savings and investment related question. It says, let's say I save 2,000 Rand per month. What would be the best way to divide it? For instance, half savings, half investing, and could this be done over a 10-year period?
That's so, I don't have an answer without info. I don't know if you have a framework you normally use.
Again, what is it all towards and for? I would start with, well, have you got your buffers? Have you got your emergency fund? And starting to build that up. Have you got your fund for your ad hoc expenses? So the things that don't impact your monthly budget, but for example, you service your car once a year. I see that throws people off a lot, and they go into credit or into emergency savings for that. Maybe start with those first and start an investment on the lowest amount you can, and then shift those ratios over time as you reach those savings goals. So for example, an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months worth of income as a buffer, and having each year, if you plan your monthly expenses around, well, if I know a car service is going to be 12,000 Rand a year, I'll put 1,000 Rand a month towards that. And then you can be shifting that needle more towards the investing side once you've got those savings buffers created. Not sure if you've got anything to add to that,
No,
Tracy.
I think that's a great answer.
Another question I'd like to phrase to both of you ladies is, with so many options in the market, what is the best product or vehicle to invest in your child's education? When I had my first child, like many mothers, I was keen to secure a better future for my children, and I put money in an education policy. What options do parents have, and what are the pros and cons of these products? Because we don't just read the fine print.
So I think if it was me, and I'm talking about a youngish child now, I would open a tax-free savings account in their name. Why? Because you've still got a long term, assuming you're saving for them until they're 18. And as the name says, all those returns grow tax-free. So that benefit of earning a tax-free return on a tax-free really compounds the money. So that's what you call sort of the vehicle, the wrapper. But you've still got to put your investment inside that. And so again, because it's a very long-term investment, as we spoke about earlier, you want something that mostly has shares in it. Now, you don't want to go be choosing again as to earlier, this share is better or that share is better. So generally something like a unit trust, where again it's professionally managed and they pick and choose these things for you and package it, is the kind of investment I would look at. And then the third aspect is, because South Africa's economy represents such a small part of the whole world, I would include quite a bit of global exposure. So kind of the three things is tax-free savings account, in that potentially something like a unit trust with a lot of shares and global exposure. That's how I would approach it. I don't know if there's other product sets you would look at.
Not specific products, but read the fine print. Ask questions about the marketing and advertising terminology around products. What makes an education policy different from a normal unit trust investment? And then another piece of advice I'd give as a parent to another parent is look at the costs of early education, not just university. Because depending on whether you're choosing government or private or a combination in between, it's actually more expensive to send your kid to private school these days than it is to send them to university. So it's quite an old school thought that we need to save towards university. Our parents might have had to in the days where education was a lot cheaper, but the inflation rates on education is really high and it's increased over time. So now I find a lot of people I know are spending more when their kids are going to primary and high school. And then university is a blessing because it's half the price and you feel like you're getting a holiday and something back for it. So do your research as well about and think about the kind of education you want to provide for your child and what is that going to cost and how that fits into lifestyle.
Tracy, you mentioned something about tax-free savings. And there's a question here that asks, is tax-free saving then, right? Tax-free saving should then be tax-free investment?
Yes. So I'm going to use this as an analogy. So the tax-free savings, as per the official name, is like this glass, okay? So there's water in this glass. Now I could put coffee in here, it might burn my hands. I could put tea in this glass. So when we talk about tax-free savings, it's the glass, it's your container which gives you that tax-free benefit. I can put different things in here. So to our conversation earlier about savings and investments, I could go put a fixed deposit in here and that interest could be tax-free. I could put an investment in here, like we were talking about the longer term or shares, and that would be tax-free. So that's just the container that's giving you the tax benefits, but I can put different things, savings or investments inside it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up, I do have another question I think is important and something that we haven't touched on in detail, retirement. This question says, I have 10 years before I qualify for early retirement and I would really like to retire then. What are the pros and cons? I have a bond which I'm in. I have a bond and I'm in its 9th year of repayment. So I think, Pamela, can I hand this over to you?
So I just want to find out if that person has a bond. Look, any debt you have, we all know that you can approach the bank and request that they give you a settlement amount. Because obviously you are then offering to settle it way sooner than what you would have settled it initially had you just settled it at the end of that period that you guys had agreed upon when you entered into the loan agreement, which is the bond agreement. I'm wary sometimes when people want to retire early because they are obviously that's the finance part of it, but the bond part of it, obviously the advantage is that if you want to settle that bond earlier before you, obviously when you retire, there's going to be a lump sum of a payout, and our viewers then going to have the opportunity to then approach the bank and say, look, I want to settle my bond. This is the outstanding amount. When can I pay it? Obviously, then you don't have to pay the interest that would have accrued over a period of time. There will obviously be a bit of penalty here and there, but there is a positive in the fact that you won't pay as much interest as you would have paid long term.
Would you ladies like to add?
So I'm not sure if our viewer would want, context would be very important in this instance. But further to that, we are obviously happy to take further questions or engagements on our social media platforms, so that we can get a bit of context and understand where that person is coming from.
Yes, and if anyone does have any further questions for any of our guests, please feel free to engage with them on their LinkedIn profiles, as well as the Ned Group chat that we currently have on the LinkedIn page as well. Now, it is Women's Month, and before we wrap up, I would love to ask all of you, ladies, individually, as women, what financial or savings tip would you give your younger self?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I think enjoy some of your money. Yes, save and invest and be responsible, but also enjoy it. Often we work so hard, and I know I get caught into the thing like, save for this, do for this, be responsible, do this right, and then you don't always enjoy the journey. So yes, be responsible, set your goals, but also money is there to achieve other things and bring enjoyment in certain ways. So I think that would be mine.
It's a really tricky one, because I didn't do too badly, but I think I would just ask more questions around why. Why are you spending money on this? Why are you spending money on that? Because whilst I did save, and I did save towards and achieve some awesome goals too, I spent a lot of money on a lot of stuff I didn't need. stuff I don't have now and don't have anything to show for now.
Pamela.
That's I mean, it's very tricky when you ask that question because of the history of our country. We have such different resources that we had when we were growing up. So my mom gave me advice, and I think the best one she gave was that, listen, the lifestyle you afford while you were staying with me is a lifestyle that I afforded you. So whatever it is out there that you go for, you can't afford it yet. And so to my younger self, like Mary, I think I'd say I did listen. But what I would say, like Tracy, is that enjoy it. It doesn't always have to be this rigid thing where I can't even have my best bottle of wine because, hey, I'm so scared of spending, But I would say be a bit lighter on yourself, and every part of your life it has to take a journey. So tread slowly. It's okay. It's all okay. What you don't have, it's okay. What you have, it's okay. And what you're still going to acquire, it's okay. That's what I tell myself.
I love that.
I love that too. Ladies, I'd like to extend my heartfelt thank you to you, Tracy, Mary J, and Pamela for being such an amazing panel of experts this evening. We are saying goodbye, but we can continue this conversation on the LinkedIn page. Simply look at Ned Group Investments on LinkedIn, and our experts will continue to answer any questions that you may have. We do hope that you have a phenomenal Women's Month further, and a huge thank you to Ned Group Investments for being thought leaders in the finance industry as well. And from all of us, it's good night.